we are go. All right. You appear to be alive. Good. All right, all right. Give it a moment. Before we get going. For those of you who are either new here or it's been a while since you popped in, if you go to the site right there that's typed out in the text above this not quite so beautiful presenter's face, that will take you to the home of the written works of yours truly, Joshua T. Calkins-Treworgy, on Substack. That is the storytellerscorner.substack.com. Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins-Treworgy, also known as Baron Sidious. And this is Break Time Storytime, installment 17. As promised yesterday, we are going to be turning more towards the spooky season tonight and tomorrow with the presentation of an Amelia City Story from the horror tales that I tend to favor around this time of year. And when I find myself between larger fantasy projects, I do have a tendency to return to that rather unpleasant fictional county of Amelia, Iowa, and its main metro, Amelia City, and its various suburbs and satellites surrounding, to include North Perry, East Perry, and Candleton. All right. So, without further ado, and if you are not familiar, sometimes I end up kind of reading my planned presentation, and I don't check in with the chat all that accurately or in a very timely fashion when I'm doing the presentation. I do apologize for that. It's easy to kind of get lost when I'm reading from the Kindle, from the document. So before I get started, I just want to preface this. I appreciate you taking your time to tune into this channel and to give a listen to tonight's presentation. I'm going to try to do this in 2 nights, tonight and tomorrow, on the break time. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you an Amelia City story titled Ringing by Joshua T. Calkins-Treworgy, yours truly. Scooch this up. Okay. Yeah, not a problem, Lucian. Thank you. Thanks for popping in. Here on Rumble, the total number of viewers showed 3 for a couple minutes there, and then it just bogged right down to 1. But for those who pop in later on for the replay, I appreciate you as well. And I do hope that you'll take some enjoyment and entertainment from this particular tale of terror. Ringing. Helen didn't want to think about what she was seeing for 3 reasons. Firstly, she had only been living in downtown Amelia for 6 weeks after living a lifetime in the suburb of East Perry, and had been hoping that her move would go smoothly. Secondly, she had never been a fan of surprises, and this ranked as, frankly, the #1 surprise of her lifetime. Thirdly, and most importantly, the young woman redhead was too big a fan of reality in general to want to see what stood in front of her. This is the last time I check out a weird sound around this city, she thought. Never again. She had been walking home from her job at Chez Francois, which to her was more than just another waitressing gig. The wealthy clientele who dined there tended to be generous tippers, and she usually covered her rent with 2 weeks' tips alone. About halfway home, she could hear an old-fashioned phone ringing nearby. Assuming it was someone's cell phone set to a rather retro ringtone, Helen followed the sound into a nearby alley, which turned out to terminate in a switchback leading to another alley unseen to the right. Helen didn't feel too leery about being in a dark alley at night in the big city. She had taken Ishinru karate for 5 years and earned her first-degree black belt. That and, well, she had a can of pepper spray in her small brown leather purse. She knew she couldn't handle herself against a true predator in hand-to-hand combat, but the training combined with a chemical agent could see her at least escape most situations. The can was in her hand halfway down to the corner of the alley. Now the can dangled at her side in a loose grip as the ringing continued. Around that corner, some 20 yards away, was a tableau that could best be summed up as acid trip strange. The alley stopped in a windowless brick wall. Against that wall stood a long conference table, upon which sat a squat black rotary phone, the source of the ringing. No wire or cord ran from it to anywhere. A few feet away from the table and its mysterious phone stood a dairy cow with multi-hued hair covering it in patches and streaks of yellow, blue, orange, green, and red. A pair of boneless appendages hung flopping down from its flanks, the little hooves on the ends curved outward, like malformed legs. The reek of its feces on the alley floor stung her nostrils. On the left-hand alley wall, also a brick building, a light shone over the back alley door of some business. The little pool of light illuminated the side of a dumpster. Perched on the dumpster's edge was a human skull with bat's wings and little bird feet, a single eye staring out of its left socket at her as it moved its jaw around and around as if chewing on something. Blood ran in a thin trickle from a crack over its empty right eye socket. The cow opened its mouth and said in a stoner's drawl, "Hey man, you gonna get that phone?" The phone continued to ring, and Helen stared up at the winged skull as it blinked its lone eye, a flap of eyelids squelching shut and open on it. She screamed and ran off back the way she had come, dropping the pepper spray in her hurry. She didn't stop running until she was inside of her apartment 7 minutes later, the door latched, deadbolt thrown, and security chain hooked against the madness that she had encountered. Sleep was a long time coming that night. When Helen woke up, her vision blurry, her nose plugged on the left side, compliments of the cold that she was just getting over, her first thought was, I have seen the face of madness, and it looks from inside a mirror. Sitting up, startled by her own capacity for the oddly poetic at the outset of her day, she rubbed her eyes free of the rest of sleep. Her studio apartment remained as it had the day before when she had headed off to work, which is to say, cluttered. 400 square feet isn't a terribly lot of space for anyone to live in, and it gets cluttered quickly. The apartment had been ideal for her, though. Rent was only $500 a month, and included her gas and electric service. Work was only a mile and a half away, easily walked or biked to, if she ever got down to Mike's Bikes on 10th Street to purchase a bike. So she saved by needing no car. Half a mile in the direction opposite work was a small Jubilee grocery store. In short, her apartment met her exact needs for price and location. A Murphy bed, which clicked up into the wall, a shower stall in the bathroom inches from the toilet, and a 2-burner stove unit with a small oven suited her needs. The microwave, built into the underside of the cabinets next to and over the stove, was her main cooking device. Helen Green didn't want for much. Between the job at the restaurant and a couple $100 that she earned each month writing for a fashion product review site online, she was able to squirrel away quite a good deal of money each month. She only wished her employers would offer her health insurance. Particularly since, I think I'm going crazy, she muttered as she clipped the Murphy bed back into place. Her encounter from the night before played through her head now, every detail sticking out in her mind's eye, etched there, taunting her. Helen's grandmother, Elizabeth Green, had spent the last 15 years of her life in a psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of Philadelphia. She had been diagnosed as a delusional schizophrenic, convinced that a creature she referred to only as a stranger was trying to recruit her to spread demons and evil across the country. Helen knew from her own mother that her grandmother's erratic behavior had begun while still living in Amelia City, before she moved out east to, quote, escape the evil of this region. She wasn't entirely sure that her grandmother had been crazy, not anymore. If she was, then the illness seemed to have skipped a generation, because her own mother had been a rock-solid example of logic and reason. Helen grabbed some clean clothes out of her cheap little dresser, a 5-drawer Walmart special, and headed to the bathroom, grumbling to herself about madness and bloodlines. She sincerely hoped to write off the previous night's incident as nothing more than the product of an exhausted mind. Showered and kicked awake with 2 cups of coffee, Helen decided it would be best to put some clothes on before noon. This was particularly important today, since she was going to make a video to go along with her written review for the website Fashion Forward. She'd been wearing several new push-up bras throughout the week for a new clothing company, as was her assignment for the website, and today she would be performing her final review. She got into a comfortable light green sweater, a pair of bootcut jeans, and worked her curly red hair into its best look. A little foundation went on next, then a touch of blush, eyeliner, eyeshadow, and lip gloss. She gave herself a critical once-over in the bathroom mirror, grinned at her reflection with approval, and headed out to the main room of her apartment. Helen's laptop sat on the folding card table, which served as both dining table and computer space. The webcam was plugged in, and she opened up her video program with a few clicks. As it came on, she saw on the screen the entire apartment behind her, being only a studio, including the lone sliding glass window in the wall by the sink. The winged skull was perched outside of the window, just on the ledge. Helen shrieked, stumbling to one side and turning around, but when her eyes fell upon the window, they found nothing perched there. Breath coming in shortened gasps, she stole a glance at her computer screen and saw nothing out of place. She decided to grab one more cup of coffee and a bagel to calm herself down before going on camera to record her review. Helen sat in the padded folding chair and smiled at the camera, checking to make sure that the 3 bras that she had tested out were on the little end table next to her seat. She took a breath, let it out in a long, slow exhale, and clicked on the record tab. She began producing her video, talking lively and upbeat about all 3 of the products, as was her wont for these sorts of productions. She set the first of the bras aside after she finished talking about it and hit the stop button on her computer. She took another sip of coffee and then began recording once again for the second item. When she was done, she hit the stop once more, rifled through her pre-made video clips, and confirmed that the one that she had just done was followed by stock bra burning footage that she had downloaded from the internet the week before. After checking the video for editing capability, she returned to her webcam program and hit the record tab. She wasn't impressed with the third one, and she ended up giving it a semi-decent review before finishing up her recording and clicking the stop tab again. She finished her coffee in a single long pull. Helen didn't love doing the clothing pieces, Being a woman of average size and proportions, she was barred from doing wear and reviews on anything below a size 14. Being her father's daughter and having a frame suited more to being a farmer girl type than modeling, she would likely never get to do the more prominent clothing pieces. But that was why she enjoyed doing other things for Fashion Forward as a website. She looked forward to finding out what she'd be getting to do one week to the next. She checked the time after compiling all of the elements of her review video, and she began uploading to the website. She only had 2 hours until her shift at the restaurant, so she began getting ready for the walk and for her normal, everyday workday. Helen didn't notice that her window had been opened a crack between the second and third sections of her video. Later, when she took off, she slid the window shut without giving it a moment's thought. But she would think about it later, and a particular guest that she had seen sitting on the ledge just outside. And that's where we will. Oh no, I've got enough time. I can do the next section. With an hour left to her shift, Helen asked her manager if she could nip outside for a few minutes, and he let her go without any problem. It's getting pretty slow out there anyhow, he said with a grimace. Used to be this place would be packed until, 11 o'clock at night. Helen pushed through the back door in the kitchen, which led to a wide alley that the restaurant shared with a daycare center. Helen held the door open for Ramon, one of the cooks, to head back in as he pitched his cigarette. He stopped and gave her a surprised look. You smoke? No, she replied with a grin. She pulled out her cell phone, one of her few extravagances. I just want to check some stuff. Facebook? Among other things. He chuckled, shook his head, and headed in, and she let the door drift shut. Right away, Helen headed to Fashion Forward and checked her numbers for the new video. It had just over 7,000 views and 53 comments. It had been liked and shared on Facebook and Twitter and other places 162 total times. Huh, new record, she said, hopping up and down a little. Looking through her comments, Helen heard a hollow metal clunk clunk and looked up. Standing 20 yards away, chewing what looked like a wet piece of cardboard, was the Technicolor cow. Ice ran through her veins as the ringing of an old-fashioned phone sounded somewhere nearby. The cow dropped its cardboard and gave her an impossible, needle-toothed smile that split its face in a curve all the way up to its ears. You gonna get that? It asked in its dull stoner's voice. Helen let out a sharp squeak and hurled herself back through the door and into the kitchen of the restaurant. She ran through the kitchen, then off down a corridor which passed the manager's office to the inside break room. There she sat in the far corner from the corridor, her feet up on the edge of her seat, hugging her legs. She shivered and held herself there for 10 long minutes, allowing her heart to go back to its normal pace. Helen Green tried not to think about her grandmother's fate. And that's where we will leave off for tonight's presentation. I'm just now realizing this might actually be a 3-nighter based on the length of the story. And that's where we'll pick up when we come back for tomorrow night's break time, the story time. Get a call. Sorry about that. Just being given the heads up for something to tend to when I get back. As you may have noticed, the price of a studio apartment might seem really off. I first wrote Ringing back in, I think it was 2009 or 2010. It was one of the tales that was included in the second Amelia City short story collection. And that anthology collection is entitled In Amelia We Do Not Trust. And that compilation, that anthology, is available for purchase in many different places online where you can find ebooks and trade paperback from your preferred electronic or physical book retailer. Although currently, last I knew, the book or the anthology is only available in digital format right now. It may come back to being physically available. Oh, very likely, Lucy, and they did. Very likely someone popped in and out. You know, that's the thing. I'm not too worried about getting people and keeping them here throughout the entirety of the live presentations. It's an opportunity for me to hop on, to get into a routine, to push myself, to have these presentations, and to provide a consistent, steady source of entertainment options when it comes to genre fiction. There's not exactly a whole lot of folks on Rumble, at least, who are doing this sort of thing, not in live stream format, anyhow. And there's not a whole lot of folks who are doing genre fiction, independent genre fiction presentations of their own material on YouTube either. Sure, there's plenty more than there are on Rumble. Certainly, I've only ever seen maybe 3 or 4 other folks on Rumble who are sharing genre fiction of any sort. It's a fairly niche crowd that I would imagine would take up any kind of interest. But just because there's not a lot of folks doing it doesn't mean that the folks who might be interested in that sort of material doesn't mean they don't deserve to have it made available to them. And so here I am, offering that up to them. I'm a storyteller. That's what I do. If they're not going, if they can't be here live because they're at work or they're out having, you know, a life, what have you, the video, at least, the presentation is archived, so they can always come back some other later time to give it a listen or a watch. Obviously, I say listen because there's not a whole lot going on screen. It's just me reading the material off of my Kindle, because I emailed myself a copy of the story, and then I used this to open up and download that file so that I could have it easily transportable with me on a separate device from the phone so that I could read it out aloud while using the Rumble the Rumble Studio app on the phone, while still being able to access the text and present it. It's a little bit of convolution, but it's not that bad. Certainly, it's easy enough for a Luddite like myself to handle so that I can provide these presentations. Oof. Yeah. So the cost scale for Miss Helen Green's apartment, I wrote it down. This is still the original price structure. And mind you, when I wrote this story, I was still living in the Southtown suburbs, just outside of Buffalo, New York. And at least in the suburbs further away from the city, you could get a studio apartment or even a 1-bedroom apartment pretty cheap. Obviously, with her living in a major metropolitan area, I probably should have jacked the price up to be a little bit more believable. But there's a whole other factor regarding Amelia City and its suburbs, the whole of Amelia County. There's a reason why the cost of living is not that high. And the more you become familiar with the Amelia City stories, the more you might come to recognize that rationale yourself, which would be, why would anyone choose to continue living there when this sort of stuff happens so much? The fact of the matter is, these are not everyday happenings, but they do seem to happen a lot more in Amelia County than in most other places. When I've talked to folks who poke or prod or have questions about Amelia City, I often find myself telling them Amelia City is my silent hill. It is the uncertain place that haunts me perpetually, eternally. And the thing that lives at the center of it all, wrapping himself in shadows like a black blanket, is Quoth, he of the beak, that raven thing. He's always just around the corner. And if you look hard and long enough at anything going on in Amelia County, chances are you'll find his clawed, feathered finger resting somewhere nearby. The question is, do you really want to see him? Aren't the things that he employs for his amusement enough? Exactly, Lucian. These things aren't really happening. There's just a whole lot of ghost stories around Amelia County. That can happen, right? You've heard of haunted houses. Why not a whole haunted city? Who's to say? But Quoth is not the only threat. Obviously, there are other things, particularly the strangers. Lucian, were you present when I was doing the presentation on break time, story time of peers is a somewhat subjective term? I asked because there were a pair of strangers that showed up in that story. Merrick, he of the chains, and Jago, he of the flames. There are other strangers, and in time, you folks will get to know all of them, and you'll get to know kind of what to expect from several of them, including the stranger named Roderick, he of the blade, the stranger that hunted down and slaughtered a vampire when I offered the presentation of There Are More, and They Are Worse, also on Break Time Story Time. Bearing in mind that when I wrote that story, Roderick was the youngest of the strangers. He is not anymore. There have been another two strangers that have become part of Amelia's other populace. They're a very particular demographic, and you don't want to shake their hands to try to secure their vote. You might not get all your fingers back. But before I turn this down and head back into work for the evening, Lucien, do you have any questions for me that that you think I might be able to wrap up and answer within a 5-minute time frame. Although I end up going longer sometimes, I can be a bit long-winded. And obviously for folks who are watching later, I'm giving it a moment for Lucian to think up a question and type it up in the chat. I think he's the only one here in the chat right now. So going to give him the opportunity. There we go. Nothing comes to mind. I usually riff the ongoing conversation. Okay. Well, thank you, Lucian, for popping in once again. It's always good to have somebody to have a little bit of brief back and forth with as I wrap these things up and throughout the presentation. Always good to have you. And you're always welcome, as is anyone who decides they just want to take a step away from whatever's going on in their lives, whether it be your day-to-day, work-a-day, average person's existence, or the absolute dumpster fire that is the current Western socio-political environment, especially here in the United States. If you need a break from all of that nonsense, well, I'm glad that you decided to take that opportunity to take a step away from it all and just enjoy a little bit of a story. It's what I do. And I do hope that you're taking some enjoyment from it. And I will continue to provide it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. I'd like to thank you for listening. I ask that you take care of yourselves, and as always, keep reading.